Okay, great. So I called this one How Journeys Change Us, recording every step on the Israelites' journey in the desert. So as you know, I often like to start with sort of one pasuk or one verse of the text. This time we're actually going to read a bunch because there's a whole long list, and we have a double portion this week, Matot Masai. And Masai starts with all of these journeys and marches that the children of Israel took on their way from Egypt to Israel. And it's a long list, and they kind of all go together. So we'll read through this quickly, even though there's a lot of it. And sort of think as we're going, why do you think the Torah, which is normally so careful about how many words it uses and what it shares, is going through so much detail over and over again of all the steps that the Israelites took on the way. So do I have a volunteer who would like to read this for us in English? Oh, Diane, you're on with your picture. Great. Okay, go ahead. Who said I'll read? Heard someone. All right, I guess I will ask someone. Deborah Eiferman, would you like to read for us? You always have such a beautiful reading voice. You just have to unmute yourself. There we go.
There were marches of the Israelites who started out from the land of Egypt, troop by troop, in charge of Moses and Aaron. Moses recorded the starting points of their various marches as directed by the Lord. Their marches by starting points were as follows. They set out from Ramesses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month. It was on the morrow of the Passover offering that the Israelites started out defiantly in plain view of the Egyptians. The Egyptians, meanwhile, were burying those among them whom the Lord had struck down, every firstborn, whereby the Lord executed judgment on their gods. The Israelites set out from Ramesses and encamped at Sukkot.
Yep, keep going. You're doing great.
They set out from Marah and came to Elam, where there were 12 springs in Elam and 70 palm trees. So they camped there. They set out from Elim and encamped by the Sea of Reeds. They set out from the Sea of Reeds and encamped in the wilderness of Sin. They set out from the wilderness of Sin and encamped at Dofka. They set out from Dofka and encamped at Elush. They set out from Alush and encamped in Rephidim. It was there that the people had no water to drink. They set out from Rephidim and encamped in the wilderness of Sinai.
There's more. So if you want someone else to take over, it's a lot of wandering.
Okay, you want me to continue?
Sure, if you don't mind.
No. All right. They set out from the wilderness of Sinai and encamped at Kibroth Hattaavah. They set out, if this was in Hebrew, it would be easier for me.
Yeah, I mean, if you can read from the Hebrew, you certainly are welcome to.
All right. Okay. They set out from Kibroth Hattaavah and encamped at Hazeroth. They set out from Hazeroth and encamped in Rithma. They set out from Rithma and encamped in Rimon Perez. They set out from Rimon Perez and encamped at Libnah. They set out from Libnah and encamped at Risa. They set out from Risa and encamped at Kehilat. They set out from Kehilat and encamped at Mount Sefer. They set out from Mount Sefer and encamped in Haradah. They set out from Haradah and encamped at Makaloth. They set out from Makaloth and encamped in Tahath. They set out from Tahath and encamped in Terah. They set out from Terah and encamped in Mithkah. They set out from Mithkah and encamped at Hashmonah. They set out from Hashmonah and encamped in Moseroth. They set out from Moseroth and encamped in Bnei Yakan. They set out from I lost the place.
Oh, sorry. I think you were from Bnei Yakan and encamped at Or Hagidadgad. These are great names, right?
Okay, let someone else take over. I lost.
Here, we can do et cetera, et cetera. And then they encamped, I'll just do the last one. They set out from Kadesh and encamped at Mount Hor on the edge of the land of Edom.
Okay.
So, yes, so great. So as you can see, this is a very, very long list of a lot of names of a lot of places where they camped out. So again, for the Torah that normally is so careful with all of its words, what's your sense of why give this very long list of all the stops on the way to the land of Israel?
Well, obviously, it was quite a journey, and by having this list, it makes it realer. You can feel as you're going from place to place. You went 3 days straight without finding a place. There was one place that had 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and then you're in a place where people had no water. And as you do this, you feel like you're living through it. And since none of us could go on vacation now and plan trips, this is the best we're getting during COVID.
I love that. I hadn't even thought of that. That's great. And, welcome, Terry. Good to see you.
Yeah, I had trouble getting on. That's why I was.
Okay, no problem. Go ahead, Ruth.
They must have gone very slowly.
So that archaeologists could later try and track the archaeologists. They didn't know it at the time, but that's what they did it for.
I love that. That's great. Yeah, Howard, go ahead. I know you were in the middle
What
of
I was going to say is it wasn't that far a distance. At least they went direct. I mean, it's really just Sinai Peninsula, but yeah. they must have doubled back or something. Or maybe they didn't move for days at a time. I don't know. It shouldn't have taken that long. But 600,000 people is quite a mob.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and I can always pull it back up. But yeah, I think that's an excellent point of, it isn't that far of a distance. So what were they doing for all this? What were they doing for all this time? And it probably shouldn't have taken that long. Rebecca, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, when you name.
So Rebecca, we lost you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was saying that I feel like when you name something, you give it significance. So by naming all their stops, they're saying it's not just the journey from A to B, it's the places you stopped along the way are also significant for whatever reason.
Beautiful. And we're going to talk a lot about that, of what does it mean to journey and what does it mean to have a destination. So beautiful. Great. Arthur, go ahead.
Well, in the questions below, it says, why are there 42 stops? But I mean, if we know that they were out there for 40 years.
38. Yeah.
Well, so there's a good chance that a lot of these stops that they mentioned are like year-long encampments, like average a year-long encampment. They didn't just go in for the weekend and set up their trailer and, split on Monday morning. Right. These were year-long encampments, and they had to build a place to daven and have sacrifices and everything else. So it was a long settlement until they decided to pick up and move to the next venue.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. And the commentators are going to pick up on that. So spot on, Arthur. And at least, I think when I read this more closely, it's kind of surprising, at least the way I normally think of wandering in the desert. I didn't necessarily picture them really stopping for that long in places. I think it's very different than the way we normally talk about it, the way we celebrate on Sukkot. It's a kind of different mentality of what did it mean to wander for 40 years.
Who authorized the stops? They started themselves by the hierarchy, or was that given to them through Moses, by God through Moses?
It seems to be by God, because they had the cloud and the fire sort of on two different ends of them, and they would stop when one of those would stop. And so it seems that God was sort of in control of when and how long they stopped for. Yes, Miriam, go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of relating it to the current situation, we, during this period where we have to quarantine and shelter at home, are looking for all kinds of things to do, and we have access to all kinds of things to divert us, to entertain us, to teach us, and so on and so forth. What, for 40 years, did the Israelites do? How did they occupy their time? I know there's a certain amount of schlepping and packing up and decamping and encamping, but after a while you get that into a routine. You have a lot of time on your hands, especially if you're getting food from a good source. So how did they occupy their time?
They didn't social distance. There was interaction among families, and it was just, no matter where they were, there was an interaction. We're concerned about what to do because there's no interaction, except, thank goodness, for Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great, I love that. And I think it's a really interesting idea, Miriam, to think about like, what were they doing? Because we sort of get the highlights of, you know, mostly when they misbehaved, like what happened and how did God react and how did Moses react? But yeah, we don't really have that day-to-day information of what did they really do all day long. Especially.
The question
initially,
came up previously when we were discussing it, was it this course? When we were discussing Shemitah and Yovel.
Yeah.
So that's where the farmers are not plowing the fields and harvesting and attending to maintaining the soil. So I was wondering, what did they do when they had a year off? It must have been difficult for them not to work, especially the men. You identify so much with your occupation and your labor. So how did they handle that particular hiatus?
Yeah,
Well,
great.
I
So I
think
see,
so many people.
wait, 1 second.
There's
So I see Diane has a hand and she hasn't spoken yet. So Diane, go ahead, and then Suzanne, and then we'll go from there.
Childcare must have been an issue, and they were probably making more babies also as they were going through all these years. That's a way to keep you busy.
Sure is. That is true.
Oh yeah, I have no problem with the women being busy. It's the men during a year of Shemitah that is a question.
Yeah, great. So Suzanne, and then I see Irene and Howard. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Well, during the Shemitah, of course, they were planning their fields for the next year, and most probably tending to their animals that have been working very hard. Now, the one thing that I don't think we're factoring in is exhaustion. There had to be a lot of that, and then just preparing food, you know, daily needs take a lot of time.
Yeah.
They didn't have the running water.
Plus, there were a lot of people who weren't Jewish. It was a whole mess of people who had come along for the ride, so to speak. What happened to them? Where did they go? Did they observe the boundaries of the Mishkan?
So the Erev Rav are interesting. It's sort of they're referred to as this this other group of people that came with the Israelites out of Egypt. So we're not totally, you know, lots of interesting interpretations of who they are. We can certainly do a class on them at some point. But yeah, interesting takes on the different commentators on what they were involved with, how much they were involved. So yes, they're very interesting things. So
Did they get off the trolley?
Did they get off the trolley? I don't know. It's a great question. All right, so Irene and then Arthur, and then we're going to move on to the commentators.
I was looking at the comments on in the Eitz Chaim, and they refer to a midrash that compares this list of place names to the situation of the king whose son was taken ill, and then at the return journey, at every stop being placed, he reminded his son, "Here's where you had a headache. Here's where we stopped to rest." And what that caused me to reflect is that being isolated, being quarantined, there's very little serendipity in our lives. There are very few chances to create memory. And I think of the many things we've lost by being in this situation, it is that interaction, that ability to create a new situation, to have memory of something. I think that's why the days lend so much, and to have this itinerary, to try to do an itinerary of, you know, what could conceivably be almost 2 years of isolation is really you see how, though they may have struggled, we're struggling, but, we hope we don't get a fever. It's like,
Right.
it's really a stark contrast to what we're living now.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, right? How much does it help psychologically? And it's interesting to know, did God give them a sort of travel plan, or did this also, they sort of waited for someplace in 2 years and then were told to move on? But it's really interesting to think like how much psychologically it helps us to have markers of different time. And I was talking to a friend that during this time, one of the things that's been so hard for her is she said, normally in the summer I go on vacation, we're seeing these friends on July 4th and this family on Memorial Day, and this is happening on Labor Day, and to lose all of that sense of structure of what the year normally looks like, and to have some sense of what's coming, yeah, I think is absolutely a huge loss.
And also the serendipity of experience that you
right, and right. That now there's no chance meetings. There's no, or it's much less likely there's going to be any chance meetings, that something surprising is going to happen during your day that you weren't expecting. Right. What happens when it's all monotonous? Okay, so Arthur, you had a comment, and Marjorie, I see you, but if you could hold it until after we move on to the commentators, because I want to make sure we at least get to something.
Just very quickly, thinking back to this approximate year-long or however long these cycles were, it would be interesting to know how long they actually spent traveling, say, on the road from A to B, then B to C. And then when they encamped, did they actually, was it according to a planting site? Did they actually plant crops while they were traveling? Did they have enough time to plant the crop, stay there for 5 or 6 months, and then harvest the crop before moving on to the next leg of from C to D and D to E? How long were the cycles? How long, and were they able to plant crops and get food that way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, I think some of that is lost in the details we don't know. We do know that God was feeding them with the manna, so we don't know how much they were supplementing or not supplementing with the manna. And if they didn't have to cook for themselves, sort of like Suzanne was saying, then the days feel even longer, because if you don't have to that at least gives you some sense of sustenance and needing to take care of yourself. And, for those of you who are in Judy Matthews' class, some sense of creativity of what you could make. So if even that's taken away from you, then I feel like, Kal v'chomer, all the more so probably how empty potentially were their days. Although again, like Deborah said, they actually could interact with each other in ways we can't. So potentially that filled up their time. So thank you for all of that. Keep thinking, and Marjorie, I'll call on you as soon as we read a commentary. But just wanted to share some takes of some ancient commentators and then some modern ones of sort of what do they make of all these journeys and why bother with all of this detail. So let's go on to Rashi, because you at least gotta always have a little bit of Rashi. So would someone like to read the Rashi out loud for us? Diane, go ahead. You just have to unmute yourself.
These are the journey stages of the children of Israel. Why are these stations recorded here? In order to make known the loving acts of the omnipresent, that although God had decreed against them to make them move about and wander in the wilderness, you should not think that they wandered and moved about without stopping from one station to another station all the 40 years, and that they had no rest, for you see that there are here only 42 stages. Deduct from them 14, all of which were their stopping places in the first year after they left Egypt. Further, deduct from them the 8 stages which were after Aaron's death. It follows that during the whole of the 38 years, they made only 20 journeys.
Beautiful, thank you. So I definitely see some head nods. So Marjorie, I'll give you the first chance to respond to either the previous text or to the Rashi.
Well, Rashi sort of answers my question or my thoughts on the part of why you think some stops get small descriptions and some get larger ones or more detailed. I was thinking in terms of either it's events that happened, which gave the longer description, or the amount of time that they spent at various places. It wasn't succinct enough in the first part for us to know, but Rashi has a bit of an explanation in my terms as to why some were longer than others.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Anything you think about the Rashi, and what do you make of the fact that wandering is seen as an act of love here? This is an act of love from God.
I should have read ahead. I should have read ahead.
Yeah.
Because if they're staying 2 years in a certain place, maybe there's a good chance that they planted a crop and harvested, maybe even twice.
Yeah. Yeah,
What
certainly
did they need?
possible.
What did they need a crop for? They had the mind.
Diversity.
Yeah. Right. We know they start crunching about the mana that it's even though it tastes like anything you want it to taste like, according to the commentators, that it gets boring at a certain point to just eating the same thing all the time.
How much pasta can you eat during this pandemic? I mean,
Yeah, very true. Ruth, did you have your hand up? No? Okay. Anyone have any thoughts about this being an act of love from God to wander in this kind of way?
I'd like that to be elaborated because I'm finding it difficult.
Yeah, I found it difficult too, to be honest. And this is all he says. So I can certainly give my take of what I think he's trying to say, but I'd love to hear if anyone else has any thoughts. Nope. Okay. So I can give what I think maybe is the explanation. Oh, sorry. I wonder if he's saying that God punished them, but even in the punishment, God is trying to be kind. So God said, you're punished and now you have to wander in the desert for 40 years, but because I love you, I'm going to try to make the punishment as kind as possible. So I'm going to, make you wander, but let you stop, it seems basically for like 2 full years almost, for a huge chunk of the journey. So for 2 years, you get to stay in one place and then you'll move again. So at least if you have to wander, it's at least the kind of kindest wandering I can make you do. Potentially. I don't know how much I agree with his argument, but I think that's what he's trying to say.
I think there were a diverse group of people traveling together, and that generation just saw itself as slaves in Egypt. It took a new generation to see themselves as pioneers. And I think that that's psychologically why it took 40 years.
Yeah. So we're going to get to that. That's definitely what one of the commentators talks about like how much time you need to move from one psychological place to another. So beautiful. Vivian, go ahead.
Did they know that they were going to be traveling for such a long time?
No.
They did once the spies. So after the story with the spies where they go out and, the spies say the people are too great for us. We're not going to be able to conquer. God as punishment says you're going to have to wander for 40 years because this generation of non-believers basically is going to need to die off before you enter the land of Israel.
We want to know, when is this going to be over?
Yeah. Yeah.
40 years.
Right.
Oh,
Well, let's hope not. But yeah, it is interesting. And going back to what Irene said, right? Of when you don't know what's coming, when there's no sense of calendar, how hard that can be. And I wonder for the children of Israel, like if you knew you only had these 40 years of wandering and you were going to die before you got to the land of Israel, or Moses himself knows, right, that he's not going to make it in, and he's wandering for those years. Does that help to know that there's a timeline? Does that make it worse? I mean, I think it's a very interesting question. All right, great. So let's move on to Sforno, and the Torah HaAruch are kind of similar. So maybe we'll read them together and then talk about them. And just keep thinking about, again, with all of these, and like I always say, you don't have to agree with any of them. So you don't have to like Rashi's explanation about, God being loving in the wandering. So I'd love to hear your take of, do you like these interpretations or not as we go through, and which one do you like the best? So Suzanne, would you mind reading this Sforno for us?
God wanted all the journeys to be recorded in order to compliment the Jewish people who had followed him blindly through the desert where nothing grew, so that as a reward for their faith, they would deserve to enter and inherit the land of Israel. Well, that's a 40-year test, huh?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And then if you don't mind reading the Torah HaAruch, who's a different commentator, says it a little differently, but similar. So then we'll talk about both of them together.
Nachmanides adds a further element and writes that the detailed report here is designed to negate the claim of people who feel that the story of the Israelites surviving for 40 years in a desert devoid of the barest essentials for survival is beyond belief. And those people diminish the experience by claiming that surely the Israelites were only at the edge of the desert all that time and had easy access to regions that were inhabited and civilized. By tracing the movements of the peoples, such assumptions by latter-day historians, real or so-called, are laid to rest by the Torah. Anyone tracing the route of the Israelites will not find even a hint at the ruins of previous habitation. The miraculous nature of the entire experience, every step of the way, is preserved in the minds of our people when we read these lines.
Beautiful, thank you. So any thoughts on these two commentators and what they make of this journeying in the desert for so long?
The only thought I have is they were lucky that longevity wasn't what it was today. And maybe that period of time was to make sure that God saying that this generation will not enter the land of Israel. They happen to all they will die before. If people lived into their 70s and 80s, they'd still be traveling for a long, long time.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. So what if this had been a 70-year journey or an 80-year journey? Like, I guess Lucky was only 40.
And letting them live out their lives a normal lifespan.
Right. That is a very interesting punishment, right? So that God doesn't say, which God does in other cases, to just kill them all off right on the spot, which God could have done. And it's an interesting punishment. I never thought of it that way. Thank you, Deborah, for like, what does it mean to actually let them live out their lifespan? Just it has to be in the desert. Beautiful. Miriam, go ahead.
In terms of Nachmanides saying that we shouldn't think that this story is beyond belief. We shouldn't diminish the experience by claiming that surely the Israelites were only on the edge of the desert all the time and had easy access to 7-Elevens in the neighborhood. The point is, if they had names, there had to be some kind of human habitation, human history. Somebody had to name the place. It had to be known. It had to be recognized. So he's sort of he's undermining that argument by neglecting to point that out.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, and it's interesting to know what the names with the Torah, like, were these cities beforehand? Sometimes they get named afterwards because they stopped there. What does it mean to have
who named them? Who named them?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and also it's interesting in the desert. Like, were these just like little oases in the desert that people who are traveling tend to stop at every so often? So kind of more like a gas station than like a city. So maybe there were other people kind of wandering in and out, but if there wasn't really so much there, was it really a city? Yeah, it's a great question. And he is clearly trying to argue that there was nothing there because he wants it to be like this was really miraculous that they survived. This is all to show how great God is, at least according to the Torah, which is interesting.
I want to know what they did with their days because they harvested the crop of manna early in the morning. Then on Friday they got 2 shares for Shabbos. And what were they doing in the desert? They weren't. Why would they cultivate the land? God was giving them food to eat.
Right, exactly. That's what we were talking about before, right? So it's a great question that we don't really know the answer to. Like, how did they fill their days? And we don't really know. It's one of those great Torah questions that you can fill in with modern midrash. Diane, I think I saw you had a hand also.
Our question about enough time to plant a crop and then harvest it may be moot, because if they were the desert all the time, there wasn't soil that would really enable a crop to be planted. They didn't have methods of watering and pipes and all of that then. So I don't know if they could possibly plant a crop.
Yeah.
But if you're saying that these were places that people lived and had names, it's possible that if there were people living there and settled there in Rephidim and all these other places, that they had crops going there, and that
I don't know that.
that's right. So you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we don't know. We don't know. It's an interesting question. All right. So just because of the time, and I know some of you might be wanting to study with Rabbi Katz at 12 for Hartman. Just want to get to the Tziftei Tzadikim, and then we'll see how many of the Mana commentators we get to. But very different take. Ooh, this is a spelling mistake, so let me change that right now. He's a Hasidic thinker. It's a very different take on what this all means and what does it mean to journey and what was happening for so long. So I want to just make sure that we see it. So, Fran is on. Fran, would you like to read for us? No? Okay. Sabina, would you like to read for us? You haven't spoken yet?
Okay. This world is called the world of tikkun, repair, repentance. Every day, every person needs to repair and make repentance for what happened yesterday. The angels are called those that stand because they are always at one level. They don't have to merit and the need to repair the past. But people are always going from level to level of righteousness. And this is what the verse means. These are the journeys of the people of Israel. And this verse, they camped and they traveled, is about always going and traveling from level to level of righteousness.
So thank you. So as you can see, this is a very different interpretation of what was happening on all these steps in the journey and what was going on. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about this one.
A very optimistic outlook about people improving all the time when they move from one level to another.
Yeah.
It sounds,
it certainly is. Yes, Diane, go ahead.
It sounds to me like the whole idea of the wandering in the desert was a metaphor for people to realize that their lives can be a wandering with thinking and improving and looking at things in different ways.
Yeah, beautiful, right? It's a much more internal explanation of what does a journey mean. And it's much more psychologically what's happening.
If you talk about that in terms of today, so many people who are quarantining are saying, here you have a chance to be with your family, you have a chance to look into yourself, you have a chance to do certain things. And then also with the protests, you're looking into the actual, tikkun olam and repairing the world. So there are parallels on a lot of levels here with today.
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring this text in because I thought it was an interesting take on things. So I'm just going to stop share for a second so I can see all your faces. Yeah, so any other thoughts of what does it mean to make tikkun, like a tikkun every day? What does it mean to have this internal kind of journey?
It must have been very boring for a lot of the people. Got up in the morning, you got your food assignment for the day, and you were done. And they weren't conducting Hebrew lessons. I don't know what they were doing. It's almost like a dream.
Mm. Right, well, certainly in his interpretation, then, if you had all this free time, then it seems like they were really using it to try to make themselves the best people they could be, which is a really interesting thing to think about.
I don't think in those days you had that much free time. I really don't. You were grinding the wheat, you were baking, you were cooking, you were, meals took 2 hours to eat. It wasn't just caring and living took a lot of time.
Washing,
I'm sure there were arguments in the square. I think there were, intellectual things happening, but really just sustaining life. We've got it pretty easy now. We don't have to go down to the river to wash our laundry. Our dirty clothes.
I mean, if you just think of basic going to the bathroom, I mean, who knows how long, did you have to dig a hole? I mean, so how long did things like that take? So I think your day was probably pretty filled up with a lot of things, things like that. People got sick, people were caring for them, women were having babies. I think there really was a lot happening, and all of that took a lot of time. While the men were discussing whatever they were discussing, the women were doing all that.
This is the class today, it's the last one.
Yeah, all right, Miriam, go ahead.
The class for connection and communication.
Yes, this, although there's mention by the...
All of these, I'd just be curious for training.
Yeah, I'm just gonna mute you for a second. Go ahead, Miriam.
Well, there's mention of the acts of loving kindness and tests of your stamina and your internal abilities. There's no mention in the text, as far as I can tell, that they were taught anything, that they were taught Torah or Torah prep, let's say, or commentary or anything to explain things. That's one thing. The other one, if they had manna, I don't assume that they had to do any of their own agricultural developments, although they might have. Well, we're not dealing here with sandy desert. We're dealing with midbar, which is wilderness, so it could be scrub and maybe there's soil underneath someplace. And the third thing I forgot.
Okay. If it comes back, let us know. Rebecca, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so it is, God did make this a punishment that they had to wander, and so maybe this part of it, the tikkun part is, well, I want you to think about what you've done, like that side of punishment. So like, you don't have to provide your own food, you don't have to plan the route. I'm gonna do those things for you so that you can reflect on the meaning of what you did and what you can do next to kind of counterbalance.
That's beautiful. I really like that, because how often do we feel like there's all this emotional stuff that you need to work out and you're so busy doing a million other things of like the practical life things that you either don't have time for it, or you do those practical life things to distract yourself from the internal work you need to do, because it's always easier to, you know, clean the dishes than to really think about how you hurt someone and how you want to make that relationship better. So I think it's also interesting in Corona times, you know, sort of, again, when someone brought it up, you know, is this a time to sort of think about, what am I grateful for in my life? What do I want to do different? It's a long time to reflect, which can be very painful and hard because there's all this time that you don't know how to fill, and it can be scary to have a mirror to look at yourself that much and that frequently, or it could really be a possibility to say, how do I want to be better? And certainly now that I'm starting to think that Elul is coming up, and we've been talking so much about the high holidays, and what we're going to do, it felt appropriate to start thinking about, you know, tikkun and, you know, what do we want to do to repair and how do we want to be different already. I know we're not in Elul yet, and I don't want to terrify everyone because Elul can, because that means the holidays are coming, but I've been starting to think about it. So yes, Miriam, go ahead, and then we're going to look at some modern commentaries.
I'll be real fast. If they're making sacrifices, don't they need animals of different kinds? Or did they not have herds that they had to take care of, or at least move along and maybe supplement their diet that way, or at least keep them in good shape so that they would have them for the sacrifices?
There were no sacrifices.
There were no sacrifices?
No.
Well, it seems like there were some happening in the tent of meeting, potentially on the way. So maybe there were, and we know that they leave Egypt with cattle because it's some of the things that they take from the Egyptians. So yeah, maybe there's a lot of time with the, you know, the ranchers and the cow herds and all the people taking care of all the animals.
Rabbi?
Yes. Hi, Fran.
Hi. I have to think that if they're wandering, there isn't a sense of permanence. And if we're going to make a comparison to what we've lived through for the past 20 weeks, many people are feeling, you know, lost. Their life as they knew it has stopped. And there's going to be many challenges that have to be met. Jobs are being lost. Housing is being unaffordable to many. So the uncertainty of life, I think, is comparative.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Howard, go ahead, and then we're going to look at some modern commentaries. You have to unmute yourself first. We can't hear you.
When I was in the military, you got up in the morning and you were told what you were going to do for the rest of the day, and you were told what the uniform was of the day. You couldn't wear anything just what you wanted. It was whatever they decreed you wore. And I think that keeping track of all these children in the desert was pretty much the same thing. I can't imagine God saying, well, you can pick X, Y, and Z to do today. This is what everybody was doing. And believe me, it takes out of life's uncertainty is minimized when they're telling you how to dress. And this is more similar to that than going about your business or thinking about what it was like before the virus hit.
Well, if you don't have a job, you're not going to be able to live.
That's true, but God is providing for them. He's giving them food. And what more do they need? And presumably they have shelter, the tents. So what more do they need?
Right, so I think it's interesting. I think, you know, one of the things that I love about the Torah always, and certainly with this text, is there's so much we don't know, right? So I feel like it could certainly be how Howard says, right? God is saying you get up then, you daven then, you do this then, this is when you get the manna. Or, you know, it could be sort of more like Fran and other people have been saying, like, we don't really know, and it could have been all this empty time, and what did they do, and what did it mean? And I think that's the beauty of the Torah text, because you can read in many interpretations into it. And that's one of the reasons I always love doing this class with you, is because I always feel like I leave with more thoughts and interesting things and different ways to think about it than I came in with. So before we're done, let's just look at some modern commentaries and just see what they add to our conversation. So I wanted to share this. Sivan Rahav Meir, she's a Israeli journalist. She's Haredi, so very, very interesting, and wrote this book with like kind of little snippets about the Parsha. So when anyone, and this is a completely different take than anything we've read so far. So is there someone who would like to read this for us?
I like to read.
Okay, go ahead, Ruth.
The phrase, "these are the journeys," is not merely a summary of a past journey, but also a prophecy for the future. We are going to make many more than 42 stops during our journey. Just think how many cities and villages, hotels and ghettos, melachs and camps we have endured, lived in, and departed from on the journey through the wilderness until this very day. Rebbetzin Esther Jungreis was a Holocaust survivor who wrote that the Jewish people must always retain the spark of godliness throughout its journeys. Amidst all the atrocities that the Nazis did, I always told myself that despite of everything, I am grateful that I am on the side of the murdered ones and not the murderers. When I look at our journeys, I think that the name survivors is inappropriate. We should be called victors. The Jewish people did not survive the Holocaust. We beat it, and we must continue to win.
Thank you very much. So yeah, very different interpretation than what we've seen so far. So I'd love to hear if anyone has thoughts about what Sivan is saying, and do you agree with her or disagree with her?
I think this is a fabulous commentary that you know, when the Jews usually, you know, are seen as victims and as different things, and here you're taking, you're owning it, and you're saying no, we survived, and rather that, but if we survived, by definition, that means we beat it and we're victorious and we're victors. And I think that if, you know, they talk about like children and seeing and what you're taught affects what goes on the rest of your life. And if you're taught that you're a victorious person, you will act differently than if you're taught that you're a survivor.
Mm. Beautiful, right? So it's giving power to it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Rabbi?
Yeah, go ahead, Fran.
I think it's psychological strength if we see our fellow congregants who are Holocaust survivors. It's been amazing what positive attitudes they had. And to take that attitude, I agree with you, Terry, help them in continuing life and forging ahead and surviving. I mean, Elsie's husband at 15, Cy, jumped off the train because he realized that they weren't going to where they said, that it must have been going to Auschwitz. And as Elsie had said, he survived in the forest as a child. So if they came back with positive intent and didn't allow themselves to be beaten by it, yes, indeed, they did survive. And they did win. They did win. They beat the Nazis.
And we're still here.
Yes, yes.
We're here.
We survived PS 81, Terry, so that in of itself.
There you go. Right, and I think it's interesting what she does. I'm just going to do stop share for a second. That she really is taking, you know, this wandering in Egypt to say this is the wandering of the Jews, you know, ever after, right? This was the beginning of the wandering. This was certainly not the end of the wandering. And so, again, like I always say, and I love that she did this, right? It's making the text relevant to her life, to the life of our people and what's happened in our history since then, and sort of saying, how is this Torah relevant to me right now and relevant today? All right, so any last thoughts on her? I think we're gonna skip Shuli Rubin Schwartz and then do a poem, because I always love ending with poetry. All right, so I will just say, if and when you have time, look through the email. Shuli Rubin Schwartz, the new dean of JTS, writes again sort of about the psychological piece of journeying yourself and how do you transform. It's more similar to the Siftei Tzadikim of what does it mean to take your own internal journey and who pushes you on that journey? Is it external or internal? So worth looking at some point, but we'll end with a poem because I just thought it was beautiful and I'd love to hear your thoughts. All right, so anyone who hasn't read yet, would I like to read this? Marjorie, you haven't spoken so much. Would you like to read?
Okay. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles, mend my life, each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones, but little by little, you left their voices behind. The stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save.
Thank you. So this poem was called "The Journey" by Mary Oliver, just in case anyone missed that. So this is clearly talking about a different kind of journey. So any thoughts about this and how it relates to everything we've been talking about the last hour?
I name it persistence.
That's beautiful. You want to say a little more, Deborah?
It's also recognizing your own strength and not listening to all the other voices, and realizing that, you have something inside you and, you're enough and you go on.
Yeah, beautiful.
Within the journey. It's your own journey.
Right. Right. Taking ownership of your journey and having persistence, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Diane, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a very optimistic poem. Whatever happens in the end, you yourself can keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Deborah, it looks like you want to say something else. Go ahead. Oh, you're muted. Just unmute yourself.
I never use the word survive unless it refers to people who have come through the Holocaust. To me, the word survive means a certain kind of experience and torture that you had. So anybody who has survived the Holocaust is a victor. So they are victors, not survivors. Survivors are those who came through the Holocaust and experienced certain unbelievable things. Other people did not. So I never use the word survive for myself, and I never think of it for anybody else. I think it's almost a holy phrase that belongs to a certain segment of our society.
Okay, thank you for that. Suzanne, I saw you had your hand up. I'm just going to stop you.
I think this has a lot to do with decision making, and you can listen to everyone around you and kind of meld thoughts and so on, but then you make your own decision and you own it, and it gives you strength.
That's beautiful, right? And that's certainly a big journey to go on, I think, for a lot of us, to say, even if other people are saying different things, even if some people are telling me this is not the right thing to do, if I in my heart know this is right, this is what I'm going to go forward and do. And try to save, I love that she's talking about trying to find her own voice and saving herself, of what does it mean to, again, I think going back to the Siftei Chachamim, Siftei Tzadikim, to say, how am I going to make tikkun every day? What am I going to do to keep making myself a better person? Even when it's hard, and even when there are lots of people telling me this is not it's not possible. And how do I keep moving forward?
Mm-hmm.
It also it doesn't mean that everything you do is going to be successful. That you don't know, but you go through and you try to do the best you can to get to certain things. And I'm sure you're going to have some experiences that are better than others. But sometimes if you've done something that isn't right, you learn a little bit about yourself, and then you try to find something else. So I think it encompasses not just the concept of going on and doing great things, but the whole life experience.
Right, beautiful. And that, right, what does it mean to try and fail and keep learning about yourself? And I think, just to sum up, in case anyone's going to learn with Rabbi Katz soon, to say, I think that's what I love about the journeying for the Israelites, right? Is it's a lot of starting and stopping and learning and making mistakes and still going and figuring it all out. And, that's why I think this was so appealing to me right now, is I think the time that we're in is a lot about figuring things out, making mistakes, starting, stopping. Are we going to reopen, not reopen? Like, we're sort of in this time when there's a lot of changes all the time. And what does it mean to sort of take ownership of the things we can take ownership for, and to have persistence in the things we can have persistence in, and to say, where am I on this journey? What journey am I going on? And what can I control about where I am, how I'm interacting with other people, the kind of person I want to be as we're living through this crazy journey we're all on together. So thank you as always for learning with me. I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes. I'm going to officially close now, again, in case anyone's going to learn with Rabbi Katz at Hartman now. I know one of the sessions is starting, and joy as always to learn with all of you, and come back next week for Rabbi Katz, and I'll be back the week after.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.